Hello, good morning. My name is Catherine Torp, and I'm here to welcome you at BI, together with Alex Buman, to this webinar about has COVID helped develop a digital internal culture, or is this a myth? And we have two professors with us to help us explore this topic, as well as a colleague from NAV. So, Alex, maybe you would start to talk about the NORA.
Yes, thank you. Alexander Buhmann, I'm Associate Professor here at BI for Corporate Communication and also Director of the Nordic Alliance for Communication and Management. First, also from my end, a warm welcome to all of you who've decided to join us this late morning or early lunch break. And second, just a few words about where you are right now digitally. So the Nordic Alliance for Communication and Management is a cross-disciplinary research group that explores communication as a strategic driver of organizational performance and success. Specifically, we identify and discuss emerging trends in communications from a board-level strategic managerial perspective. And we do so specifically in a Nordic context, with a specific interest in Nordic perspectives. We bring together Nordic top executives like today, Katrine and Dervis, who share an interest and a mandate for really tackling the challenges of managing their organization's communication function. And we bring them together with leading researchers in the region, like today, Eliane, an expert on the digital economy, new forms of labor, and Sut I, of course, one of the leading academics in this region on communication and leadership. And the work of the Nordic Alliance is supported by a unique group of top executives that are research-minded, that support our work and with which we run regular workshops for mutual exchange, for discovery, but which also allow us, through their support, to run these more public events like today that are really meant to further stimulate debate in the Nordics around these topics of communication and management. And finally, we're very fortunate to have this close relationship with EACD that really allows us to harness this exchange between academia and practice. And over to Katrine for more on EACD.
The EACD is a European Association of Communication Directors, and we're trying to bring together practitioners to share and develop best practice, and also to create a common platform for us to share what we discover and discuss the kind of topics that the academia kind of help us find as emerging trends, but also that we can inform the research community about topics to explore further. And I think the topic we're going to discuss today is kind of top of the list in most management teams. So with no further ado, I think I could welcome Sut I to the stage to talk about how working from home has impacted our new normal, our lives.
Thank you so much, Catherine, for the very kind words introducing me in here. So maybe before we start, I can talk a little bit about myself in this context. So I'm a professor in communication and leadership in the Department of Communication and Culture. I'm also together with Professor Christian Fischler. We are the director for the Nordic Center for Internet Society, which is a center has been funded by the Norwegian Research Council and also the Horizon 2020. So in our center, we do a lot of work looking into the role of digital technology, how that influences the way that we work and the way that we approach work. So for my expertise, I'm more looking into digital teams, digital leadership, and the management of digital transformation. And together with some of the colleagues at SINTAF, we have been doing some research during the lockdown period to see how communication has been carried out in such a restrictive period. And so that I'm going to share that with you. So first of all, just want to bring in that element of working from home. Is it the new normal? What we see so far is that it certainly challenged our understanding of what is office, what is the space of office and what they do to us, and how are we going to associate that in the future time. I think that was a wake-up call for many of us. We didn't understand how much we're relying on that physical proximity until we are forced to be working at home. So what's different working from home and working physically with other colleagues? So first of all, the most important thing is that the collaborations are very different now. So before we were relying a lot of like a face-to-face collaboration, and now they are becoming virtual. Especially in the Nordic management, we're focusing a lot of, like, for example, agile method, agile team, and that relying a lot of small adjustment, and those are really relying on that physical proximity to make that happen, right? And so now we are having that digital collaboration. What we observe from the period we did our research on the different organizations, we see that when people are talking together, they become more task focused. What is the upside and downside? The upside is that your meeting tend to be shorter because more effective, right? However, we also lose the social aspect when having those meetings or when we have those conversations with colleagues. So in the literature, that we call it like the water cooler effect. The water cooler effect is that when you're hanging out in the water cooler, in the Nordic, I guess it would be the coffee machine, that we talk a lot of things that may not necessarily that will be work related, but that help us to bond, that help us to understand the organization better, that help us to understand the team better. But without those means, how could we facilitate those digital water cooler? In our research, we observed that teams that are better off, they are able to have spontaneous communication. And that is something that you should reflect in your team. Would you feel comfortable spontaneously call up your colleagues or having a chat without an actual scheduled meeting? And that is something that we also observe. People tend to report they have more meetings. But however, what we see more closely is that the informal conversation now has to be scheduled on Zoom, right? You can no longer just walk through the hallway and get things figured out, but you will have to call up have a formal meeting. So you may not necessarily have more meetings. Maybe you're still doing the same, but it gives us a feeling we have more formal meetings than before. One of the downside of working from home, what we see in the research is that we have unclear divisions between what is home, what is work. We tend to work longer hours than shorter. We also feel less productive, not because we're actually less productive, but because we feel more drained, right? We feel more consumed in having meeting, for example, Zoom. There is a known phenomenon, what we call the Zoom fatigue. It is not because of you having more meeting. It is because scientifically there is like less than half a second that that's a delay when you're having the Zoom meeting, and that drains our brain because we're not used to it, right? And it is that consumption of our energy make us feel less productive. But objectively, when we see teams across overtime during the lockdown period, their productivity does not drop at all, right? And so in terms of research, when we're looking into the virtual teams, there's a lot of benefit of having digital teams. One thing is that you no longer have that physical boundary on who you form the team, meaning that you can recruit people that outside of your region easily based on the merit, which is a very important element for how we see the impact of HR, right? However, what we see also the challenge for virtual teams is that we tend to have more task conflict, because task conflict needs to be solved in a more complex manner. And with the digital mean, it may not give us that channel to resolve those issues. We tend to communicate less. We also tend to share less, especially common knowledge, because we become more task focused. Our brain automatically thinking what is the most important thing to share, right? And then we reduce it. we tend to feel that we perform less. We also tend to feel less satisfied working alone digitally, right? And so I just want to share with you one last message that a study that we have done together with some of the colleagues here at BI and also in Rotterdam. We did a diary study looking into how people work when they are working from home. So this is Cheryl. So Cheryl start with the day that feeling happy that she working in a virtual team setting, she can choose where to work. So today, Cheryl choose to stay at home because she wants to stay focused. And because of we wanted to stay focused, Cheryl stopped to communicate, right? And so the purpose for her, like before Corona period, when we still have to can choose where to work, that we want to stay focused, that actually lost the meaning because the lack of communication make her feel isolated and make her feel helpless about her work, right? And so this is something that we have to be more mindful, is that how can we have our co-presence in the digital environment? How can we create the digital water cooler? How can we not only focusing on the task, but also focusing on the social aspect, which is important for our collaboration in team, right? And that would be my questions to you. Not that COVID have forced us having a digital culture. Being able to communicate with emails doesn't help you to have a digital culture, but it also is certainly waking up like the questions of how will we see office space, how will we see the digital space, and that I will leave it out to you to think more about. And thank you.
Thank you very much, Siki. Very interesting reflections, and I think that Eliane, you're going to talk more about how we use online collaboration, both before the COVID, during the COVID, and afterwards. So please, Eliane.
Thank you so much, Katrine. Thank you also, Suti. Very exciting format. I'm very, very glad to be able to be here and to share with you some of our current research that we're conducting here at the Nordic Center for Internet and Society. I guess, as Katrine mentioned, I'm going to be talking about online collaboration before, during, but also eventually then after the COVID-19 pandemic. And the data that I'm going to be presenting is grounded in two studies that we did. The original larger study was conducted way before when we still had normal levels of craziness in the world. It was before the pandemic. And then we were just interested in finding out how people collaborate with digital tools such as Slack or Trello or Jira or Project Wiki. So how does the fact that projects are now set up with those tools, how does that change the way people communicate, how they coordinate tasks, and how they collaborate? And then COVID hit in March, and we decided to do a follow-up study on this. So we we're still in the process of conducting interviews with the same people from the first study, just to see which of those findings in the first study still hold, which are maybe exacerbated, or maybe if there's new themes or new challenges emerging now with this global pandemic. So the first part that I'm going to be presenting is from the first study. That's the results from our study that was conducted before COVID. And here we were interested in finding out how collaborative tools change work processes. And just to take this in advance, the changes that those tools spark, they are fundamental and substantial even without considering a global pandemic. So we're going to see first what the changes are before the pandemic, and then we're going to discuss how these changes may be potentially developing during the pandemic. So how do collaborative tools change work processes and workplaces? We found that there's an entire collaboration paradigm which is changing. So now if I'm in the workplace where I'm using Slack, for example, where my project is managed by Slack or by a wiki or by Teams, I find that suddenly everything that we're producing is accessible to everyone at any time. And we call this paradigm a hyper-connective work paradigm. What does it mean? What do we mean by everything? Well, that means that everything I'm working on right now, the documents that I'm working on, but also the metadata, such as the comments, the likes, the shares, the completed tasks that I might have today or that I may have had yesterday, all of that information is suddenly out there, is accessible. So we have access to everything, which is great, especially if you're a project manager. It means that you have a much easier time now reporting. It's very easy to track progress. It's less time wasted on doing those PowerPoint slides where you report to your superiors, because everything, the entire work process suddenly is solidified within this digital environment. That is good. It's also connected to some challenges. For example, if everything is available, then that might lead to a lot of noise. So part of your work now is to do this triage between what is important for me right now and what is maybe less important. So there's a certain noise that you have to cope with. Another change that is inherent in these hyper-connected work environment is kind of the accessibility to everyone. So you're working in a network, you're seeing what your colleagues are working on, your colleagues are seeing what you're working on. Right now at this moment, it's very, very easy to access all the information, all the expertise within your own team, sometimes even outside of your teams, through those tools, which is great because you do have access to this collective brain of your organization. Suddenly it's very effective. But it can also be challenging. Namely, it can be very scary to share your work at an early stage. It can be scary when your colleagues see everything that you're doing, even if it's not perfect yet. And it can also foster something that research calls digital presenteeism. So meaning that I have to divert part of the energy I put into work every day. I have to divert part of that energy into showing up, into being visible to my colleagues. So at least a part of the content or of the posts that I'm producing are directed towards managing my own visibility and not necessarily towards managing my own productivity. A third aspect of this new work paradigm, of this hyper-connected work paradigm, is the temporal aspect, so that everyone has access, or that everything is visible all the time, instantaneously. So that means that, as we discussed before, this is really great because people are seeing what I'm working on in real time. So it's not that I close myself in my office for 2 weeks and then I come out with my finished report. It's that from the first day that I'm working on a document or on a project, my peers, my team can see what I'm working on, which directions I'm going, and perhaps also where I could need early feedback. But it's also an issue, and this is one of the most pronounced issues on the individual level, that you might have blurring boundaries between work time and non-work time, because your office literally is often in your back pocket because you have this more mobile paradigm that you're working on. And sometimes it's just physically hard to resist, if you have a notification, even if it's the weekend, not to look at it. So this blurring of boundaries, this digital presenteeism, but also this potential overload, these are issues that are just connected with these digital work environments that were there long before COVID hit. Now, what happened to these hyper-connective workplaces that we're all increasingly find ourselves in if we put in a global pandemic into that mix? And here's where our follow-up study comes in. Here's the interview study that we're conducting right now, where we're trying to look into how COVID has affected the use of online collaborative tools. And I will just share with you some insights from the interviews right now. We have made 3 observations so far, but as the interviews keep going, there's going to be more observations to come. But one of the most striking observations was that the sheer volume of content, if you think of the very first print, that everything becomes accessible, the sheer volume of content has risen. So between March and May, the volume of posts, of content that the case company shared on Slack has risen by 30%. So a normal week during Corona produces 30% more output, or more posts, more content, than a week before Corona. Now, this organization only uses Slack. They don't use email. They don't use any other channels. They primarily use Slack. So it's actually, from a research standpoint, a really perfect lab condition to actually see how the conversation, the communication volume develops. Part of that volume makes sense, is due to a larger coordination need. So if you're not sitting next to me, of course, I have to write you maybe a message more, I have to comment more, I have to ask for feedback. But another part, and this surprised us, was that they're noticing, yes, part of this increased volume is just people showing up for work. So people writing in the morning, hi everyone, or writing a joke, or just signaling somehow, okay, I am at my workstation right now. So this digital presenteeism, it's possible that this is even more pronounced now that we are in this COVID situation. Another observation was that at least part of this volume was due to crisis communication, or to exceptional communication needs that arose during this crisis. And our case company handled this by opening up an entirely new channel. They opened a channel on Slack. It was a COVID channel. It wasn't called COVID. I think it was called Working from Home. But they used this channel exclusively to communicate all the emergent information. So they used it to quickly, reliably diffuse important information quickly. That was the work schedules, for example, or the work policy, working from home, and so on and so forth. So they used it to diffuse information resources quickly. But, and this was surprising, they also used that as a social space. So they also used that to address those needs where people were stressed out, when they were lonely, where they had questions, where they needed to vent. Sometimes also when they needed to joke, they resorted back to that channel. So one interview partner told us, we also share a lot of jokes. Well, you can't always be so serious about these things. So they found an avenue in the absence of a physical channel to use this COVID channel as a social environment as well. The third finding, that was to me the most surprising. I don't think it would have been surprising for Suti, because she already noticed that in her research. It was that the team felt that they were at least as productive during Corona as they were before. So all their KPIs was all green, so all their productivity, performance indicator, they looked very, very good. But when we talked to well, that person a bit longer and to more people, we also noticed that maybe this is not the best way to measure productivity, or to measure how well you are doing, especially during such a challenging situation, because many people, they were feeling burnt out, stressed after the first week, and this of course increased as time went by. So we have a juxtaposition between actually a really, really productive view on the one hand, and a really challenging view on the other hand. So based on these observations, if we move forward, what are the discussions that we could have even after the pandemic, even after we've returned to kind of normal levels of craziness again? So what are the maybe strategies we can adopt within our own organizations to move forward? Well, based on both the original study and the follow-up study, I just want to give you kind of three ideas on where to take the conversation within your organization. First, it would be good to have a conversation about finding an equilibrium between kind of pushing for productivity and productivity KPIs on the one hand, and encouraging time off on the other hand. Because you cannot just, in a short term, focus on your productivity, you should also look to keep up your workforce's productivity in a longer term perspective. What does it mean? Well, in our case company, that meant creating a clear work governance, insisting on break. They have a culture where they start meetings always 5 past the hour, and they end every meeting 5 to the hour, and they enforce that quite rigorously. Ending meetings on time is an essential part of their culture. And they also started to rethink their KPIs. So instead of just having their green dashboard where all the productivity KPIs look very good, they're also doing a weekly mood poll where they ask, just weekly, it's an anonymous survey where they ask their workforce, how are you feeling today? How productive were you this week? What are perhaps the obstacles that you noticed towards your own productivity? So just so they have kind of a way to gauge not just the output productivity, but also the mental status. Trying to stay within the time here. A second discussion that you might have is to think about using those digital tools, not just as collaboration spaces, but also as social spaces. What Suti said, this digital water cooler aspect. I think this is very important, that you think of not just using those tools as work environments, but also as channels where people, for example, can have informal discussions, where they can have fun discussions. The Case Company, they also had little competitions that they're doing where people send out pictures from the home office and then vote on the best pictures and give small prizes. So they kind of try to curate a water cooler or a coffee machine environment even within the digital work environment. And here it's key that the top management here leads also by example. They found when they started kicking those competitions off or sent small videos from their own home office that this really worked in fostering this kind of social environment. And lastly, a discussion might be fruitful to have about the value of each channel. So it should be critically evaluated how different online channels can be used. Not every digital channel is equally productive for each purpose. For example, if you have a spectrum of channels, you have text-only channel where you write something, you have a voice channel where you call someone, you have a video channel where you have voice and picture simultaneously, and then you have a very physical channel where you actually co-located. I think it's a good idea to really think carefully what purpose which channel serves. For example, a lot of the stress apparently in this Case Company stems from having too many video calls, which are, as Sut I also said, can be very fatiguing and can be very absorbing. All right, so far our findings of this study. We'll have more findings in the future to come, and I also look forward to your questions about this issue.
Thank you very much, Eliane. Very interesting. And now we're going to hear from NAV and Dervis. Are you ready to share some insights from a very big organization that has actually been put to the challenge during the corona crisis?
Yes, thank you, Katrina. Let me share my slides. Okay, so can you see my slides now?
Yes.
Yes, okay. So thank you so much for having me. Thank you to NORA and EACD. And my name is Dervis. I work in NAV IT. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about how the pandemic affected us from viewing it from the IT side. Yeah, I work as a principal officer for a team of developers in NAV IT. Before doing that, I worked more than 10 years as a software developer. And I have also been an active part of the community outside for 5 years and more, leading different organizations. So the very first thing I want to say a huge thanks to all my colleagues, not only in NAV IT, but entire NAV all over the country. We are almost 19,000 people working in NAV. And without the great work from all of my colleagues, it wouldn't be possible to be where we are right now. So I want to take you back a little bit to 2016. That's when we started our journey. We basically reset the entire IT strategy in NAV. And from 2016 and so on, we started employing our own developers and being focused on building a strong IT department and to really take ownership of our solutions and to deliver changes faster. So the very first thing that happened in the beginning was that the tools that we were used to being using as Skype, HipChat and so on, they reached end of life when Slack and Teams and those modern tools took over. So we quickly shifted over. And we have been using Slack and those modern tools for a while. And we did some additional important things. We open sourced our code. Is available to the public on GitHub. We organized the whole organization into product teams in order to deliver better and quicker changes to software. And maybe one of the most important things, we worked really hard to build up a mobility platform that allowed us to work remotely and basically outside of this locked platform that NAV used to have before. So, and another thing we was doing was we really focused on having a clear vision and a clear roadmap and really unifying everyone and bringing everyone up to date and where we are actually, where we want to bring the Norwegian welfare and labor administration. And our vision always have been from the start to create one of the best welfare and labor administrations in the world. And this focus, together with internal knowledge sharing and a lot of other stuff that we was doing, led to a lot of good stuff. And we got a lot of attention in the media and so on. And this led us to this somehow the hallelujah feeling at one point, and we were really feeling like we are doing really good until some bad stuff happened. And this, I think, took as a surprise, all of us probably. But we learned something important from this, that we learned that we are one, and we always stand together. We are one now, and it's important that even though the IT side of this wasn't really like the main cause, we are still together as one organization, and we really focused on making building that unity in that case. And being on the IT side, we helped the rest of the organization actually help out in the work. So some key takeaways from this first part is that initial transformation, having the vision, and also building an organization based on trust, on diversity and inclusion are really critical. Having the voices and the opinions from everyone, not only the leadership, but from everyone, every employee is really important. And having autonomous interdisciplinary teams, there is a whole research that's on this topic, and also we started early looking into the digital collaborative tools, the potentials and challenges. We made it as a part of our culture to try and see if some tools make our work more effectively. So we was already doing this for a while. And then in March 2020, this year, on Friday the 13th of all days in the year, all of us was ordered home. We was basically trying to understand how do we tackle this the first weekend of that week, because we had 200, 300, 400,000 actually people getting laid off, and we had so we had a lot of stuff to do. And additionally, just a week later on the 20th, the government made 12 changes to the laws that makes it easier for us to actually build software that can face the pandemic. And so the thing that happened very first on the Friday the 13th, actually the first day, we had 300 people nearly active on Slack, talking and communicating together and really brainstorming. We had a brainstorming session that Friday. We had 208 people on the Trello, and we had the brainstorming session, and we came up with more than 70 ideas of how to not only make our solutions better, but actually help out in the whole organization on how we can actually make it easier for everyone. So on Slack, the thing we saw in March was the extreme, like this very large increase in messages. We have 2,000 and more members on Slack, and we have a lot of public channels. And you can see the increase from around 12 to 13,000 to more than 40,000 messages at one point. And this is a pretty dramatic increase. We use Slack as our main tool. We have been using GitHub and Slack, which is the main enabler for us to actually create an organization that's alive. And during the pandemic, we also added some additional tools to replace what we would use to do physically. Some of them you can see here. And the cultural impact, we are still on our journey. We are still trying to understand what we can learn more and what we can do better. And it helped us uncover pains, weaknesses, and deficiencies. We have to create a culture around social arenas and so on. And interestingly, also, meetings are taught through going from a lot of meetings, that some of the meetings probably that were unnecessary. We have gone to fewer meetings where only the important ones are conducted. And one other important thing I want to share with you is this risk of prejudgment, because facilitating meetings over video is very difficult. You have to, some people close the camera, some keep it open, some blur the background, some keep it visible. And in addition to this, especially on Slack, we saw that an emoji-enriched communication. We had actually had a discussion in NAV about how we use emojis in our communication, because this affects how people actually read and see and understand what is communicated. And some of the pains we noticed was home is, many of our people's homes actually is not equipped well enough for office. Daycare, kindergarten, homeschooling, this was an early challenge that we had to deal with. And one important thing I want to point out, that even though we have been making our best to include everyone, some people are still unintentionally ignored. This is a very important thing that we are working on to actually work on, to include more voices. And we also saw some challenges in the communication between business and IT. But some of the gains is that we had a much better communication from top level and mid-level leadership. We see an increased acceptance for home office, because many of our people actually, they worked quite well from the home office. We have increased engagement, and we do much more employee surveys to actually check how our people doing. And I see a general increase in empathy and understanding, also not only to the citizens, but also among our teams and interdisciplinary roles. And finally, I want to say that we really miss our colleagues. We miss those the retrospectives, the daily updates, and the small discussions then when you can just pull your chair and just ask your colleagues something. So yeah, if you have any questions, please reach out to me. And this was a pretty quick walkthrough. I'm happy to share more details if anyone has a question. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Dervis. It's extremely interesting to see how a very, very large organization dealt with this change. Now, I would just like to share a few perspectives from the Research Council of Norway. We are a much smaller organization than NAV, and our vision is to empowering ideas for a better world. So how do we do that? We are investing close to 1 billion euros every year into research and innovation, and we want to promote a society where research is not only created, but that it's used and shared and contributes to a better society, a more sustainable society. So, who are we, and what do we think about the Home Office? Just to give you a brief overview of the Research Council, we are a little bit over 450 employees. We are quite experienced, all of us. Average age is 50, and 9 out of 10 holds some kind of a degree. 2 out of 10 holds a PhD, actually, and many have background themselves from research. And when we ask them, how do you feel about this kind of new way of working since March? 4 out of 10 think they are working more productively from home. And that's a lower number, I think, than some of the research that Eliane and Sut I refer to. But only 2 out of 10 prefer the home office. Again, we miss the water cooler effect, and it's not so easy to recreate that through Teams meetings. But 9 out of 10 think they have become more productive, and that's and they think they have become a lot more digitally savvy. So, have they? That's what I want to explore. We introduced Office 365 a couple of years ago, and we could see that there were some early movers that were very enthusiastic, but it really picked up in March. Especially the meetings, of course, because it was no longer possible to do it physically. But also channel messages and chats picked up. So, the new tools, yes, we use them. but we still use the old tools as well. So we see no impact whatsoever on email correspondence, which is kind of interesting because it means that the information overflow is also present in our organization. And then another thing, when we talk about digital culture and digitalization, it's not just about Teams or Slack or new ways of interacting. It's also about how we do our work. And actually the initiatives that we have done within machine learning, they are not at all affected by COVID. They started long before, and we've been very successful introducing these into our core processes. So the Research Council is actually a quite digital company in many respects, but maybe not so much in the collaboration between colleagues. We choose a nudge philosophy in the implementation plan. And did it work? Well, a very soft implementation where kind of the people who raised their hand were introduced to Teams and Office 365, onboarded about 40% of the employees. And then we started nudging a little bit. We engaged the executive team that moved that percentage up to around 60. And then COVID, of course, helped us. And now we're discussing, do we need to do anything more? Because what purpose each of the channels serve, as Eliane said, well, that's the big issue. And we are really, really confused about what channels to use on what topics. So what we are doing, we're trying to kind of guide people. We can see that just making tools and guidelines available is not enough. We need ambassadors out in the organization who are digitally savvy and can help their colleagues. And we still haven't solved the issue of how do we create the digital water cooler? We haven't. And we can see now that at the Research Council, approximately almost half of the employees choose to come to the office because they are working effectively from home, but most of us prefer to be at the office and meet the colleagues. So with this, I think I could take back, if I can ask Sut I to come back to the camera, maybe we should take a look at the questions that we might have had during your talks. And thank you very much, all of you, for keeping the timeline. Oh, the first question was for you, Sut I. The depressing fact about virtual teams was from 2012. Do you think that it has changed now with more tools?
So that particular meta-analysis was conducted in 2002, but 2012. But then there has been some more like a synthetic kind of like an overview of the virtual team research, also showing like a similar kind of overview. During the COVID-19, so we have been doing research also on teams that are digital from before, and those are actually now forced to be digital. And overall, when we measure the feeling of isolation, they are really similar. However, what we observe the difference is that the teams that are digital from before, they are better in coping with that isolation because they are more familiar with that phenomenon. They are better at reaching out. They are better at creating those spontaneous communications to help them to stay in, right? And so that is something that we can think about. Catherine talked a little bit about the different channels. In the virtual team research, we have been doing a lot of like what channel will give the best solution in what scenario. Like for example, for web routine kind of information, it is actually good to use, for example, email, text-based kind of channel. However, for more complex situations like conflict resolution, brainstorming, it is good to have richer media such as video conferencing or even physical meeting. Some of the companies that we interviewed from before that are very digital, they have a lot of like good practices, which is also one of the comment from the audience. Like such as you can have really short video meeting in the morning coffee, just 5 minutes, just to catch up what are you doing, especially for teams that are highly interdependent. We also observe that teams that are digital cannot be too big, right? So you have to start with thinking, do you want to break down the team in different segments, right? So to help the team to stay in more closer.
Thank you. I would like to follow up with Dervis, because I've observed the same problem with the team of 20 on a kind of water cooler team session. Doesn't really work for us. I don't know if you've made any experiences on that, Dervis. I know that you have a fairly large team.
Yeah, I mean, I like to believe that we was really digital before the pandemic. We, as you have also said, we were living in this shifting between working digitally and physically. We was integrating those two, and technology being ubiquitous part of our work, and having this freedom to move around and to talk freely with people. This, of course, has dramatically changed. And for our part, we noticed that from early on, on the first Friday, when we had 300 people collaborating, I think we believed that we have superpowers and can do anything. And then 3 months later, in June, we really noticed that we hadn't really understood the effects of the pandemic on our people. And our people also felt the pain, felt missing the office, missing the people, and therefore we had this change in the way we manage our people, and doing more like the servant part, more of the managing by wandering around, listening, basically not managing, but simply listening to everyone, because we are one. So we felt pain, and we are working on doing our best to make it easier. Even though many of our people, they are able to work from home, we still have many people that feels the pain and really need to work differently. So we gradually, according to the guidelines, of course, from the government, we gradually opened the offices and allowed a small portion of our people to actually being able to work from the office. And we are still on the road. I mean, we are not done, and the pandemic is not done. So, and we have a big retrospect coming up, which we did in NAV early. The results are not back, but I can update you on those later on. So yeah, so we felt it pretty hard also.
Thank you so much. We have a question actually for you, Eliane, from one of our viewers. What should be the role of the CEOs, the leaders, in this work paradigm? Are we going to call all our team members for morning coffees on Teams, or how do we deal with that?
Thank you so much for the question. Actually, that's a great question. Perhaps first, when it comes to the CEOs themselves, I think they play a particularly important role in this. And I think my first advice for many of the CEOs would be to overcome their own hesitation as a first step. Because what we notice when we're talking to not just the CEO, but a lot of other C-level workers, we found that many of them had some issues with kind of taking the plunge, kind of jumping into the cold water and actually participating and sharing their opinions or asking questions. So we still had the situation where they still called one of their teams and asked them, could you please ask someone to get the relevant data from me from those channels? And so this is kind of a barrier that a lot of the C-level people or a lot of the CEOs might have to overcome. It's not true for everyone, certainly. There's a certain hesitation that's just still there. And this is also a bit of a change in thinking, right? Because working within this digital paradigm also means that hierarchies are kind of evolving a little bit. So the CEO might not be as far away anymore hierarchically, or at least in the perception, than before. the shift into this new paradigm. So that's the first point, kind of overcoming a bit of hesitation. Second point would be try to lead by example, by participating, by also sharing, by trying to, on the structural side, providing a good structure in terms of end meetings on time, only set up meetings when absolutely necessary. Try not to send messages way after hour. It's the small things. Just show that there's a compliance with these work policies also from the top. And then on the other side, on the more informal side, might also depend on the culture of your organization, but might also be a good or an interesting idea to start communicating also a little bit more informally. So why not share a personal opinion? Why not share a personal success strategy, especially in such times of crisis, just to maybe span also the hierarchy here a little bit. Just lead by example, try to overcome the hesitation a little bit.
Thank you. Any reflections from Sut I or Dervis on this kind of the role of the leader in this context? Has it changed your leadership style, or were you already digital before, Dervis?
I mean, it changed. I have to say that because I think it's changed my perspective on our people, my colleagues. They are unique individuals, all of them. I think I really realized that much more heavier this time, respecting everyone much more, and I really understood that without everyone working as a team and without each and every individual in the organization, bringing such an organization such as NAV with such a responsibility for the society would be difficult. We managed to deliver on all the changes from the government. We noticed that some of our colleagues worked a lot. So we had to start, telling people to, take care of themselves, and we are taking especially. We are focusing on that. I think I understand this much better now. So in one way, I think the pandemic also has the positive outcomes, such as for me as a new leader. So it's understanding the people much better. Early on, we had all of the leaders we had. Our most important task was to actually ask people, how are you doing? How are you? Not how is the status on this and that task, but as a person caring about another person, how do you do? We had several of my colleagues, were driving around to our colleagues' homes, delivering screens and chairs. And so we had this, at least in the first month, this was a thing that we did to make life easier, because we understand it's hard to being a developer, knowing that every line of code I'm writing right now is affecting someone that's affected by the pandemic. So I have a much higher respect for my people, definitely.
Excellent, fantastic. I just want to ask one final question, because we all touched upon the productivity part of it. Because 9 out of 10 in the Research Council think they work better from the home office, and your research seemed to be supporting that. So actually, maybe it's more about working less or taking care of the full human being.
Yeah, definitely. So not even just during this pandemic period, but also from the virtual team research also showing that actually people produce better, or that they work better when they have that flexibility in how they choose their work. I think that the better question is the long-term, the mental wellness that we need to take care of. Because if we continue to work longer hours, but feeling that they are not producing as much, and that produces stress, right? And that we do not want to see in a long term. So I'm really happy to hear Dervis was saying, now they put actually more focus on the people, right? That the wake up call of we have to take care of the well-being of the employee, and this is really the most important thing. And for me, the role of the leader will have to see how the information are flowing or not flowing, and be the one to facilitate that, to keep it in.
Any final comments from you, Eliane?
Yes, no, absolutely. I fully concur with also what Satish said. It's such an important issue that many organizations are going to have to put an emphasis on in the future. And when we say work-life balance, I think there's also new questions arising here. I think work-life balance, usually also in the literature, it's also always the question, how do you conceptualize your workday? When does it start? When does it end? Do you draw a hard boundary between work and family or home life or not? But there's also other questions. For example, even if you are working, even during your productive workday, I think when you are, for example, working completely digitally, you have to curate more breaks, for example. So you have to find ways that even during your productive work that you'll find ways to stretch and to walk and to maybe also find other techniques that help you maintain your productivity, not just in your off day as in recuperating, but also your productivity during your actual work day. So I think this is going to be a topic that's going to be discussed much more in organizations in the next couple of months.
Thank you. And Dervis, you've tried to find this balance between kind of work and non-work with your digital super connected colleagues.
Well, it's hard to actually. I know that I work a little bit too much than I should myself. But having colleagues that care about each other is the first start. Being reminded by other colleagues also is an important thing. So yeah, especially I also care about the community outside of my work, and we run events ourselves. So yeah, having a good health is important, even though we actually manage quite well. We managed to get the communities also through the pandemic, running online webinars and so on. But yeah, it always begins with people caring about each other. So
thank you very much. And this rounds up very nicely this webinar about COVID, and has it created a digital culture, or are we the same as before? And I think that the conclusion might be we are humans as we were before, and we need to deal with the human aspects of ourselves, even though we have a lot of channels and digital ways of talking and discussing topics. So thank you very much, Sut I, Eliane, Dervis, and all of you who have followed this this session. And I think it will be posted on the NORA channel, the EACD channel later on. So thank you.